Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Now, in today's video, we're going to have a bit of an extended analysis here as we kind of walk through some of the new long-range data that came out from the European model. We begin first with a look at what that model was initialized with. So this is the last 30 days of precipitation expressed as a percent of normal. Your eye is immediately drawn to those regions that have been extremely wet over the last 30 days. For example, this corridor right in through here, even extending into parts of the upper Midwest. Also, the Mid-South has been very wet, and we've seen lots of severe weather in the lower Mississippi River Valley heading on over to the southeast. But just taking those drawings off there and looking at where it's dry, I'm going to point out a few locations. Parts of the Southern Plains, extremely dry. North Dakota, Red River Valley, this area getting back all the way across here into parts of Montana, exceptionally dry as well. And the West Coast has seen a split flow pattern and weak upper level flow that has really just kind of not given them the moisture that we would hope to see in March and even early April. I'd like to talk about that just because I was looking at some data earlier this week. California, this is the daily mean precipitation for the entirety of the state. We're going to go back 180 days here, so this goes all the way back to the 8th of October last year, which we would really consider their water year. And this is data from the CPC. So what you've got here is this smooth black line running down the middle would be average. And where they currently sit is about 50% of average, which would actually make this, according to the CPC data, of which there are 40 years of data here, the driest last 180-day such time period on record. Who got what California, I think, wanted was Nebraska. And if you take a look here, Nebraska throughout the month of March had a tremendous amount of rainfall from two different events. In fact, a lot of this was snow and took them from being well below normal on precipitation and in drought to now having their sixth wettest last 180-day time period. And I can show you this one other way, and I'm waiting on some new data from this. We'll get the March numbers in very soon, but look at North Dakota. From the time period of last September through this February, all right, North Dakota is having its driest such time period. And as I showed you at the beginning of this, March did not return the moisture to that area. We're going to be talking about North Dakota more in depth in just a few moments here. From there, let's take a look at soil moisture. I usually show you the top 4 inches, but we're going to go down here to the top 3 feet, or the top 100 centimeters roughly. And we see a few areas that are in dire need of some moisture. So specifically getting from southern Saskatchewan, Manitoba, then into eastern Montana and North Dakota, those values there are still extremely low. And then pockets here in the central and eastern Corn Belt, especially in this section of the eastern Corn Belt, the top 3 meters essentially, or excuse me, the top 1 meter here of soil moisture values are very low as measured by NASA. And so moisture return in the coming days is going to be critical to several regions, but I wanted to point those two out specifically. You see, these are the data with which the longer-term models were initialized. And so those models could see very clearly that our latest drought monitor here, which was released on April the 1st, we'll get a brand new update here in just a couple of hours after I record this. There's still 60% of the country in some form of drought. It's extensive across the four corner states. It has been getting worse in parts of New Mexico, California, and the upper Midwest, and the northern plains, and then in parts of the Great Lakes Basin. And so with this as kind of what went into the model as it was initialized, we can then add to it the fact that about the only seasonal predictor that shows statistically significant skill, in other words, all other weather phenomena we talk about, like the MJO or the wave train pattern across the northern hemisphere, all of those events are subseasonal and therefore not predictable on a seasonable scale. Well, what we tend to look at are atmospheric momentum, and we tend to look at ocean temperatures, and that's what you're looking at right here. And a storyline that we've been carrying continues. The La Nina event is fading. As I've said last video, there's quite a bit of warm water beneath this that's going to be replacing this cooler water on the surface along the equator. So our attention turns to the cooler tongue that is in here and the cooler water that's in the Gulf of Alaska. The warm tongue that is pushing against it here, coming out of this north central Pacific, and then also the warmth that's in the North Atlantic. Remember, we're calling this cooler water along North America, this is part of the negative Pacific meridional mode. The warmth over here is a part of the Atlantic meridional mode. And what we're going to focus on over here is the fact that the warmth, should it be sustained in the Atlantic, combined with the fact that we do not anticipate El Nino development. In fact, we expect an INSO-neutral summer, okay, that would lead to increased hurricane activity. On the flip side of that, the cooler water off the Baja and the continued cooling of the water in the Gulf of Alaska increase the risk of pushing the ridge maybe closer to the 90th meridian rather than keeping it near the 100th meridian or even moving it to the west toward the 110th. So I'm talking about right in through here. Does the ridge establish there, here to the east, or is it farther to the west? And those are some of the questions we're going to attempt to try to answer here by looking at some of the longer range data. But one of the most dominant modes in terms of ocean temperature behavior feeding this long-range forecast is going to be the ocean temperature pattern you see in the Pacific here. From there, the model was also initialized with this. This is the last 30 days of temperature anomalies. And so we can see the warmth that was in part of a big section here of North America, the cooler weather in Alaska. We're going to see more how that's going to evolve in the near term as well. So I'm going to go straight here to the new seasonal updates, and we're going to talk temperatures first. And this is what the May outlook appears to be from the European model. It's actually been quite consistent with this. It's continued to show warmth here in the plains and in the Four Corner states back into California. So it looks as though we're going to have a very warm start once we get past this cooler time period coming through for the month of May. Okay. From there, if we just kind of move into June, this is the June pattern. And again, the models are they seem to be quite consistent on putting a lot of the heat here and then keeping it into, for example, parts of the Great Basin and then into the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies. That seems to be where the models over the last several runs have kept a lot of that heat. And then going from there into July, this has been a consistent picture as well. So the greatest extent of the warmest conditions have been kind of confined into this corridor. Now I want to remind you something. These models do not exhibit much skill, which means skill is repeated accuracy, and they don't exhibit that kind of behavior. They can't. I mean, the models are attempting to predict a nonlinear chaotic fluid, our atmosphere and its motions, and summarizing that over a month. What we look for is trend in the models. That sometimes improves our forecast skill, and that has been the trend to keep this region quite warm, the Central Plains all the way back into the Northern Plains through summer. Let's go ahead and just take one more month out here into the month of August, and again, we can see where that warmth continues to kind of be anchored into this region. From there, let's go back to May, and let's now start talking about precipitation patterns. I'm going to do this month by month first. And in May, overall, something interesting has kind of shaken out of the models here. This particular region has shown up now with a wetter bias. And if I could redraw this map based on some of my analysis, I would tell you that if you are inside of this area here, I know it kind of looks like a D. That is an area that I expect May to be quite active with severe storms. In fact, much of the end of April, too, getting into May. I think this is going to be a year where we avoid this large ridge in the midsection of the country that can just shut this all down early. So despite the drier forecast you see down here in the month of May from the European model, I actually anticipate quite a bit more severe weather activity. And again, it has a lot to do with the height pattern, but I'm just going to keep moving here and show you what's going on from May into the month of June. In the month of June, we start to see a drier streak showing up in the model here. We start to see something beginning with the southwestern monsoon, and the Canadian prairies look quite stormy with this particular pattern. We see that here in parts of the Midwest, getting into the Eastern Corn Belt, the models are not pushing things over too dry in the month of June either. So this is a bit of a shift over what we saw in the previous runs. But then as we get into July, and then from July into the month of August, a couple of things to take note of in both of those months. We see a pretty robust signal here from the European model in terms of the southwestern monsoon. Now, for those folks that watch my content in Arizona, California, New Mexico, the models have been busting on this a lot lately. They've been calling for a robust monsoon and pulling back. But with a broad region of higher atmospheric pressure extending into this area, higher than normal, given the warm sea surface temperatures, the models are actually becoming quite aggressive with an active hurricane season. And some of the early estimates possibly put this hurricane season at about 150% of normal activity. So we could be looking at anywhere between 15 and 19 named systems. Now remember, in 2020, we had 30 named systems. This is not a repeat of 2020, but it does look to be an active hurricane season once again. Now, what I'd like to do next is I want to put this all together. Let's just look at the June, July, August precipitation pattern. Again, the area I'm concerned about for driest conditions is in through here. And then let's also go back and show you this in terms of the temperature patterns as well. And we'll do that right here. So you can see the greatest warmth in this area. Now, if we broaden this out, let's look at this from a global equatorial view. I would now like to show you some of those patterns that I was talking about. And I specifically want to go over here. We're going to look at ocean temperature patterns first. So interestingly enough, the models which were not correct in picking up on the cold water that was here in the month of March are now starting to carry that cooler bias through. In other words, keeping this slightly negative Pacific meridional mode through June, July, August. But unlike what I anticipated, they're really pushing this warmer nose in the North Pacific closer to the coast. And one of the effects of that would be to move the ridge from the central United States west with time, which means the heat would move west with time as well. We can add another dimension to this in that the models are consistently keeping this part of the North Atlantic warm, which is why we still have that concern about the elevated risk for hurricanes. And you can see here what will be happening with the La Nina. It kind of moves into the southern hemisphere and it begins to take on an interesting look as those warmer waters begin to emerge. Again, this is an INSO-neutral situation. I don't anticipate this having a major impact on the trade winds and the flow across the tropics this year, unlike what it did last year. Now from there, I know we're going along here, but let's keep with this idea. I would like to show you the seasonal mean sea level pressure anomaly map. So when I look at this, we see our normal placement here of the subtropical ridge that's between Alaska and Hawaii. There's higher than normal pressure to the north of it. And then if you come over here, this would be the Bermuda high or the subtropical high in the Atlantic, much higher atmospheric pressure on this side of it. And again, my concern here is what this will do to steer tropical systems closer to North America. That's the main concern that I have over this particular map. And finally, what we'll finish with here with this longer term outlook is I'm going to show you the seasonal 500 millibar heights. Now, what would be most devastating to the midsection of the country is if we were to see ridging developing here, ridging developing there, and another ridge sitting here. That triple ridge configuration is very common for very hot and dry summers in the midsection of the country and cooler summers along the west. And what we've got right now, if you notice, is it seems as though the atmosphere is attempting to put, or the European model, putting some sense of a trough there and a trough here. And this is why our concern in the midsection of the country is elevated over the risk of additional heat and drier conditions for the growing season. Now, I'm going to put a caveat on all of this. These models have no ability to resolve convection or thunderstorm events. And therefore, what we have to do is wait until we get in season to monitor how the upper level flow is setting up and to see if we really do shut down at any time the Gulf of Mexico moisture transport and if there's enough flow in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere to initiate thunderstorm activity. Because remember, for this section of the country, let's just kind of highlight right in through here, 60% of the rainfall from May to August comes from thunderstorms, comes from mesoscale convective systems or squall lines. And this is an unresolvable feature in these long-range models. So we're going to look at them for an idea, but we're going to leave it at that, okay? As we come back to this now, let's talk about the near term. And what we've got in the near term is we have a front that is passing. And as you can tell here, the temperature change behind that compared to 24 hours ago, you got a 10 to 30 degree drop in temperatures. And this is going to kind of bring in some sustained cooler air. I'd like to show it to you here by just looking back at the satellite imagery yesterday, because it was kind of neat to watch this cyclone develop. It actually had two separate senses of rotation to it. So as the large storms were blowing up here on the leading edge of this, and we brought some nasty weather into parts of Missouri and further on to the south, and even some storms over in Illinois, there were actually two separate lows. There was a surface low on the backside and an upper level low tucked away here. It's easier to see if we actually go look at the radar imagery. So watch this. As I kind of animate this forward, can you see, looking back there, oops, sorry, it just reset on me. Can you see there are two separate areas of rotation in, broad scale rotation here and here. And that leading edge squall line produced quite a bit of nasty weather as it went through parts of Missouri, Arkansas, getting down to Louisiana, Texas, and eventually spread in the overnight hours into Illinois, where this low has eventually now become stacked up vertically. It's going to slow down and just move very, very slowly through Iowa into Wisconsin over the next 36 to 48 hours. But down here to the south, this is an active radar image from about 4 o'clock this morning. We still were dealing with quite a bit of severe storms. You can see here, this is from Blitzertung, one of my favorite sites, showing you where the lightning is in parts of southern Mississippi. Also some storms in northern Mississippi too. And there were some lightning strikes here in parts of the upper Midwest. From there, just a quick recap of what we got out of this. Some big hailstorms here in parts of Kansas and Oklahoma back on the 6th. Kansas and Nebraska back on the 6th. And then as we saw the storm reports from yesterday, the blue dots represent the winds. We did have 3 tornado reports. We're waiting to see what the damage looks like from those reports to see where they might rank. But this is what was along that squall line that did come through. All hazards map today. Red flag warnings out, some dense fog down here in southern Texas, and we're going to be watching out for some strong winds yet again. And you can see we're dealing with some snow here in the northern Rockies and in the northern Cascades. And here's what we've got. We kind of talked quite a bit about our kind of three separate troughs that were coming through. Here's the one that's become vertically stacked and certainly has a large tilt to it. So with a tilt like that, it's just going to slowly move into the Great Lakes. But the wave coming in behind it is partly here, and there's actually another wave here, and both of these are going to come down here through Colorado. They're going to increase the severe weather threat again from Texas to the lower Mississippi River Valley. And behind that, our next wave coming out of Alaska is going to sweep through the same areas. So the trajectory, if I just draw one more arrow, is something like this. And I want everyone to hear me on this. This is something I made a mistake with. Earlier in the week, I didn't think that we were going to be capable of tapping into enough colder air with this. I didn't think it was anchored to the right amount of cold air. And I just got that wrong. I placed too much stock on a movement of the MJO and this big ridge. Remember, I kept talking about this big ridge that was going to prevent that anchor. And in reality, we're going to actually see some pretty cool air out of this. So sorry, I missed that. Severe weather first, though. Here's our convective outlook for today. So you can see where we're going to be watching for our storms as that front slides through the eastern Corn Belt, down through parts near the Appalachian Mountains here and down into Alabama to the Gulf Coast. But then with that next system coming through, so remember there's a wave here and a wave there, and they're both going to meet up down here and initiate along the tail end of the frontal boundary from the first system. There is a risk tomorrow right in through this area. It kind of looks like a goldfish, doesn't it? Right in through this area of severe storms. So this is the target from Dallas through central Mississippi. I want to watch very carefully as we get into the day tomorrow on the 9th. From there, we see that the severe weather threat on day 3, which would be the 10th, moves now down into parts of the southeast. So again, this is with the second wave that is coming through here. And I want to show you how strong those winds are before we go look at what the precipitation is. So as we work our way here through early this morning, this is now getting into midday today, you can see how strong the winds are going to be right here in the Central Plains around that low. So we could have wind gusts here getting easily up into that 30 to 40 mile an hour range. And it's dry back there, so that's why we have the red flag warnings. Now, if you take a look, watch what's going on here coming out of Idaho and Wyoming. There's the second system. Do you see it coming down through there? It's going to bring in some strong winds throughout the day on Friday in this area, and our next low begins to take shape right here in Texas. So as that low takes shape, you can see what it's doing. The dry line is right here. The warm, moist air that's out ahead of it is in place, and a strong cold front is coming in on the north side. And what that does is that right in through this area, we produce a lot of, forcing to get the air to rise, and therefore we're watching this area very carefully tomorrow for our severe thunderstorm threat. From there, let's go take a look at what it's going to be here on our simulated precipitation maps. So what we've got is through early this morning, working through midday today, the upper level low curls into Iowa. It's now stacked over the surface low, and it's going to linger. So you just see as I walk you through much of Thursday, getting into overnight hours, that's just going to slowly meander and bring those showers into place there. Out ahead of it, this is where we could get some of our storms. Now, working our way into Friday morning, the next system moves through Wyoming. See it bringing in the snow into western South Dakota, western Nebraska, clipping this part of Colorado. It's now farther off the Front Range than we earlier thought. And then as that low begins to take shape here on Friday afternoon, you're going to see that the models begin to initiate the severe storms in this area. That's why we're going to watch very carefully in the overnight hours on Friday getting into Saturday morning. The lows on the backside, this is the leading wave out ahead of it here, pushing those strong to severe storms into the lower Mississippi River Valley. So you see it right there. So that's why the SPC, the Storm Prediction Center, has issued this region to have that enhanced risk for Friday night getting into Saturday morning. All right, that's the latest that I've got from that storm system. From there, why don't we switch over to the European, and let's do a bit of a model comparison here. So we've seen this already take shape, so let's get through the next 60 hours. There we are. Saturday morning, that's the storm system that's moved through, and there's our next wave. This is the one that's over Alaska, okay? So let's see how things shape up here. Let's go into Saturday afternoon and evening. That low, which again, it's kind of got an interesting trajectory. It kind of came in like this. The southern wave met right there. They developed the low pressure centers here, and now that low is taking off toward Illinois, okay? You can see to the south, we're going to see some storms in through this area Saturday night and rain through Illinois, pressing into southern Michigan, getting into Indiana, Ohio. This, again, is an area that would love to see this moisture coming in here in early April. And then that low moves over the Great Lakes and it becomes a bit wrapped up. Now, what does it wrap up with? Well, notice on the back side here, this has been something the models have been bouncing back and forth with. It's been quite maddening, but you can see here that possibly Sunday night into Monday morning, we might be bringing in some rain and snow to the Dakotas, southern Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and it may linger into the day on Tuesday as well. Any moisture return we can get here is critical. That's all I can say. So as this upper level low, again, stacks up here, keeping the cooler air in place as we get out into next week, we could be getting some moisture return to the northern plains. Now, as we get out here, longer term, I'm just going to go out to, this is next Wednesday, getting into, maybe next Thursday. You can see there will be, around that low, a frontal boundary that lingers, comes back like this, so we could be watching for more storms across the south. But as I take you back here, both the GFS and the European for next Tuesday night into Wednesday are trying to bring enough cold air to put some snow down here in the high plains, getting into the Rocky Mountains. And that's in the GFS as well. You ready? Let's see if the precip for the northern plains and that system there is in both models. So GFS through Friday, now getting into Saturday, and then into Sunday. Very consistent pattern overall with what the European was suggesting. I'm impressed at some of how well they're relating. But remember, Sunday, getting into Monday, the GFS also bringing in the strong winds and the moisture to the Red River Valley of the north. And it's coming in the form of snow. And I know nobody in North Dakota wants me to say snow, but if it brings moisture, bring it on. We need this desperately. What about the snow into Colorado on Tuesday into Wednesday? Well, you can now see that the GFS on Wednesday, getting into, Wednesday night, is doing the same thing. So this is what we're going to watch for as we get out into next week. But again, we're just looking at 2 operational runs here. Okay, let's put it all together. And this is the European model's forecast for total accumulated precipitation through the next 7 days. So pause it and take a closer look here. Match up the colors on the color bar. From there, let's show you the European solution for the same thing. This is what it looks like. And I'm not going to show any snow maps because snow maps in the models are going to be terrible in April. But you saw where I was concerned about snow. Again, that's the GFS, and this is the European. A little bit different resolutions here, but still, overall, they're putting precip down in the same places, which is what I like to see. Unfortunately, this flow pattern, look out west. The flow into California is so weak that we're not bringing moisture through mid-month to that area. Beyond that, as we look out here, here's our wave train coming through. 1, 2, 3. See them stacked up there in the troughs? And that helped bring in colder air from Alaska, and I didn't see it. And then I also didn't really see this being the scenario. I didn't see these lows getting stacked up here over, this part of North America, right over the Great Lakes. We saw the big ridge, but the model trend was to deepen this trough. And as a result, that colder air that's sliding into place, it's just going to be there. Who warms up? The West Coast does. all the way through the middle of this month. That's going to be the pattern. And I watched it for 3 days and sat there and cringed at what I told you on Monday because I just missed this overall. Okay, as we get out there into the third week, does the pattern evolve? Well, the models suggest it does. We start to bring in more warmth as we get into the end of April here. But before we talk about that, let's at least go and have a quick look at precipitation patterns. So why does it show up so dry into this area? Well, one of the big reasons for that is that the flow pattern, again, is coming into a trough like this. So there's upper level convergence in this area. The moisture returned to the south here, where we expect it to be quite stormy. It's limited and staying to the south in the models, at least in the European. Now, don't look at this and assume that you're going to be dry in this whole time period in this region, but it's just not calling for the overly active wet period, because to get that, you've got to have flow that comes in like this, like we had in 2019, and we certainly don't have that. The GFS is on board with the same features. You can see here in the precip analysis, it's a different color bar, but it's a different model map that I make here. You can see that south of that line, more storms, but as you get here into this region, the chances of it being a drier pattern is there. And of course, that same pattern with the ridge building to the west, we do see drier conditions and warmer conditions for the west as well. Let's talk about those temperatures. Thursday's high temperatures. You can already see the cool air curling behind that stacked low here. How long does it last? Well, that pulls into tomorrow into the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes Basin. So we start to see a rebound in temperatures for Friday the 9th. But system number 2 is now coming through the high plains here of Wyoming, Colorado, and Nebraska. And while it's very warm in Texas, as we go from Friday into Saturday, look at the cool down here. Getting into Sunday, it pushes over into the east. And then as we go into next week, this is the cool down that I underestimated. There's Monday's high temperatures compared to normal, and Tuesday and getting into Wednesday. So we're going to go from the 90s here in Texas down into the 60s and 70s, and we're going to be quite cool along here in the high plains in our hard red winter wheat belt. So now let's take a look here at our overnight low temperatures, and what we've got is for Thursday morning, working into Friday morning. Now getting into Saturday, I want you to see there's a white contour in here for our freeze line is. So this gets all the way down to the panhandles here on Saturday morning. By the time we get into Sunday, we've got some chilly air in place in parts of the Mid-South. And then going from there into Monday, now the cooler weather for next week, Tuesday into Wednesday. So that takes you out 5 days. Both models agree that this is the new 5 to 10 day temperature pattern. And my anomalies here are in degrees Fahrenheit. So as you look, we do see a region in here that could be 10 to 12 degrees cooler than normal. And I watched this trend cooler all week since Monday, and it's just continued to show up with that cooler pattern. What happened? Well, remember all the cold air I highlighted here in Alaska? We were able to displace it. And I just did not see that happening. There's warmth, a lot of it along the west out to day 5 through 10. And just to understand something here, this correlates very well with the MJO being over in phase 7. But I have big questions as to how long it's going to be able to stay there. I'm going to address in just a moment here as we start to wrap this up. So, European model, what we're looking at through the next 10 days as to where we see surface temperatures below freezing. I'm going to keep updating you with this map. This one shows you through the 17th of April in gray, where we expect to have an overnight low below freezing from the latest European model run. Getting out beyond that, this is now in the day 10 through 15 time period. We start to see the pattern evolving, so the cold air isn't going to stay around forever, and it begins to start to move here out by the time we get into the third week of April. And just remember something, the third week of April, to have temperatures in this area that are 4 to 8 degrees cooler than normal, we're not talking about a frost getting into this area at this point in April. I'm talking about down there in the south where I just circled in the southwest, southeast. But it's going to be a cooler pattern overall, as we saw in the jet stream a few moments ago. It's also in the European. So you can see here that both models agree warmth west and some cooler conditions east as this new pattern evolves. Here's what I want to finish with. European weeklies. Let's just at least look out over the next several weeks. To understand it, I want you to see right now what's going on with atmospheric momentum. Now, when you look right in this area, this would be up here between 40 and 60 north, and this would be in the subtropics. What I want to highlight is the lack of momentum here and the high momentum that's north. Now, why would I want to discuss this? Well, the reason is because this has been our pattern for a while, from the end of March through the beginning of April. And what is it? The strongest jet stream level winds have been here, and they've come in like that. There has been a sense of a subtropical jet stream picking up in this area, hence the severe weather south, okay? That is what's giving us the wind shear, and that's what's also giving us the motion in the atmosphere to be producing the severe weather south. But when I talk to you about the momentum, what I want you to see is this is how that wind field looks like when you look at how it is anomalously. When you see that anomalous wind field, notice right in through this area here, the winds are going that direction, but they're much stronger out of the west here. Same thing in the North Atlantic. See it? That is the pattern that must break down to give us a different look for the month of, well, the end of April and the beginning of May. And so given that being the flow pattern here, let's just go have a discussion about this. First, the models refused to take the MJO out of phase 7. And I told you that I'm having a hard time understanding this. Why leave it in phase 7? Are the trade winds behaving in such a way to leave it in phase 7, which again is out in the Pacific Ocean? Is there tropical activity happening off of Australia to do this? I don't know, but they're hung up on taking the MJO quickly here and just letting it stay. If the MJO instead breaks out of phase 7 into phase 8, that is going to be the first of a bit of a pattern breakdown. And that overall pattern breakdown could change this. So what are we looking at here? This is the next 45 days of temperature anomalies in a 1-week sliding window. As I move this forward, this is the cooler weather we've been talking about, lasting here through, the middle of April. We see it sliding east as we get into the end of this week 2 time period. And then we saw the warmth kind of building in behind it. Now the models want to return to the end of April and the beginning of May, some cooler conditions in through here. And what I'm going to tell you is if the MJO gets out of phase 7 and starts to move around, then this is going to be too cool of a bias. So we're going to compare the two things here, just knowing this is what the models are suggesting, and then remembering that it's hinging on what the upper level pattern's doing with the momentum I talked about and what it's also doing with the MJO. But from there, as we go out through May, we start to see the pattern moderating again here through the first week of May in this area. And I don't think it's going to be quite as cold as the models suggest here as we saw at the beginning of this forecast video. Now that was a lot, but I had a lot on my mind and I want to share it with you. And so we'll leave it there. Hope you all have a great week and we'll talk to you on Monday. Thanks.